The ultimatum had been issued at 9 a.m. Washington time on a Thursday morning, and every government in the Middle East had read it the same way. 72 hours. That was the number the President of the United States had put on the table in a statement that was 18 words long and left nothing open to interpretation. Iran would halt all uranium enrichment activities, allow unrestricted IAEA inspection access to every declared and undeclared facility, and withdraw all proxy forces from Iraqi soil within 72 hours, or the United States would take action. The statement did not define action. It did not need to. By Thursday afternoon, the USS Harry S. Truman carrier strike group was holding a position in the northern Arabian Sea, 210 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz. Its presence was not a secret. It was not meant to be. A carrier strike group in that position was its own message. 70,000 tons of steel and aviation fuel and precision-guided munitions sitting in international waters, visible on every satellite pass, readable by every intelligence service in the region as exactly what it was: a loaded weapon pointed at a decision. What the satellite passes did not show, and what no intelligence service in the region had successfully assessed, was the specific disposition of the strike group's assets at 4:47 in the morning on the day the ultimatum expired. That specific hour, that specific configuration, that specific gap in the formation's defensive coverage was the piece of information that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had spent 14 months acquiring. And at 4:47 on Friday morning, with 19 hours and 13 minutes remaining on the president's 72-hour clock, they used it. The first indication was not a radar contact. It was a sound. Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Ortega had been running the passive acoustic monitoring station in the USS Truman's Combat Information Center since midnight, 7 hours into a watch that had been completely unremarkable until the moment it wasn't. At 4:47 and 23 seconds, the acoustic signature on his display changed. Not dramatically. Not with the kind of obvious spike that triggers automatic alarms. A subtle shift in the ambient noise profile of the water column beneath the formation. The kind of change that most operators would have logged as biological activity and continued their watch. Ortega had been doing this job for 6 years. He had run acoustic analysis on 3 deployments. He classified the sound in 11 seconds. Cavitation transient, multiple sources, bearing 031, range indeterminate, pattern consistent with high-speed surface craft accelerating from a cold start. He hit the surface contact alarm at 4:47 and 34 seconds. What was coming from bearing 031 was not a single asset. It was 7 Ashura-class fast attack boats that had been sitting dark and cold and motionless in a fishing vessel anchorage 34 nautical miles northeast of the formation since 1100 the previous night. No radar emissions, no radio transmissions, engines completely cold. 7 boats carrying crews of 8 men each, 56 men who had been waiting in the dark for nearly 6 hours for a single encrypted transmission that would tell them one thing: the window is open. The window had opened at 4:31 when a routine rotation of the formation's helicopter patrol assets had created a 22 nautical mile gap in the northern sector's coverage. The gap would last approximately 40 minutes. The IRGCN planners had calculated they needed 34. The Ashura boats went to full power simultaneously. 7 cold diesel engines roaring to life at exactly the same moment, crossing from complete silence to maximum acoustic output in the span of 4 seconds. At 42 knots, they would cover 34 nautical miles in approximately 49 minutes. They were not trying to reach the carrier. They did not need to reach the carrier. They needed to reach a firing position. At 18 nautical miles, their Nasser-1 anti-ship missiles had a clean shot at everything in the formation. At 18 nautical miles, they needed to be. What they did not know, because no satellite pass had shown it and no intelligence report had captured it, was that the gap in the helicopter coverage had been noticed by someone inside the formation before the IRGCN had ever transmitted their window-open signal. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss had been the strike group's electronic warfare coordination officer for 11 months, and she had developed a habit in that time that her commanding officer had twice described as excessive, and that had twice proven itself worth every hour she had invested in it. Every night between 0200 and 0600, Voss ran a continuous passive emissions scan of the northern and eastern sectors of the formation's operating area using the strike group's EP-3 signals intelligence aircraft, which had been maintaining an orbit at 24,000 feet since 2300 hours. Not hunting for anything specific, not responding to a specific threat indicator, simply listening, building a baseline picture of every radio frequency, every radar emission, every encrypted data burst active in the surrounding ocean across every hour of the night watch. At 4:31, when the helicopter rotation opened the coverage gap in the northern sector, Voss had been awake for 22 hours. She had been watching her passive emissions display for 4 of them. and at 4:31 and 47 seconds, 16 seconds after the gap opened and 14 minutes before Ortega's acoustic alarm, Voss picked up something that should not have existed. A single encrypted transmission, 0.3 seconds long, frequency hopping, origin point approximately 31 nautical miles northeast of the formation's center. The transmission was too brief to decode. It was not meant to be decoded. It was a trigger signal, one encrypted burst sent once to 7 receivers that had been waiting in the dark for 6 hours. Voss did not know that. What she knew was that a single encrypted burst from that bearing at that hour of the morning, at the specific moment a coverage gap had opened in the formation's northern sector, was not a coincidence that deserved the benefit of the doubt. She was on the circuit to the tactical action officer at 4:32. The tactical action officer on watch at 4:32 in the morning was Lieutenant Commander James Reeves, and the report Voss gave him was not a confirmed threat. It was a data point. One encrypted transmission from one bearing at one specific moment. Not a radar lock, not a missile launch, not a contact on any active sensor in the formation. Reeves had 2 options and approximately 90 seconds to choose between them. He could treat the transmission as an anomaly, log it, continue the watch and wait for confirmation from a second sensor before escalating. Or, he could treat it as the first move in something larger, escalate immediately, and accept the institutional friction that came with waking a carrier strike group's command structure at 4:32 in the morning over a 0.3-second radio burst that might be a fishing boat. He chose the second option in 40 seconds. The formation went to modified alert status at 4:33. It was not a full battle stations call, not yet. Modified alert meant additional operators to their stations, helicopter crews to ready posture, surface search radars to active mode on the northern and northeastern sectors, and the Aegis combat systems on the escort destroyers USS Gravely and USS Cole brought to full engagement readiness. It meant the formation was awake and looking north before Ortega's acoustic alarm at 4:47 confirmed there was something in the north worth looking at. Those 14 minutes were the difference between everything that happened next going one way and going another. By the time Ortega classified his acoustic contact at 4:47, the USS Gravely's AN/SPY-1D radar had already been active on the northern sector for 11 minutes. It acquired the 7 Ashura boats at 4:49 at a range of 28 nautical miles, closing at 42 knots. 7 surface contacts in a line formation. No running lights, no transponder signals, no radio emissions. The Aegis combat system on Gravely assigned threat classifications to all 7 contacts in 6 seconds and presented Reeves with a firing solution before he had finished processing the radar report. 28 nautical miles. At 42 knots, the boats would reach their 18 nautical mile firing position in approximately 11 minutes. Standard Harpoon missile engagement range from Gravely was 67 nautical miles. The geometry was simple, and the solution was clean. What was not simple was the question that came before the solution. The boats had not fired. They had not locked their fire control radars onto any formation asset. They were fast attack craft, closing at high speed from a bearing that had produced a suspicious encrypted transmission 17 minutes earlier. Under the rules of engagement in effect for the strike group's current operational posture, that was enough. Under the laws of armed conflict that governed every action the United States Navy took in international waters, the determination of hostile intent required a command authority decision that Reeves did not have the authority to make alone. He had Rear Admiral William Carver on the circuit at 4:51. What Carver said in the next 4 minutes has not been declassified. What the engagement log records is that at 4:55, with the 7 Ashura boats now 24 nautical miles from the formation and closing, Reeves received authorization to employ defensive fires. The first RGM-84 Harpoon missile launched from USS Gravely at 4:55 and 34 seconds. Then the second. The Harpoon is a sea-skimming anti-ship missile with an active radar seeker, a 488-pound warhead, and a range that made the 24 nautical mile engagement a straightforward shot under normal conditions. These were not normal conditions. The Ashura boats were moving at 42 knots in a dispersed formation that was actively maneuvering as they closed. Their crews having recognized the Gravely's radar activation 11 minutes earlier, and having spent that time executing evasion patterns designed specifically to complicate a Harpoon engagement geometry. The boats were small, fast, and low to the water, and their commanders knew exactly what an American surface engagement looked like from the receiving end, because they had spent 14 months studying it. The first Harpoon acquired its target at 4:57 and lost it 11 seconds later, when the lead Ashura boat executed a hard 90-degree turn that took it perpendicular to the missile's approach angle and deployed a corner reflector decoy that gave the Harpoon's seeker a larger radar return to chase. The missile followed the decoy. It detonated in open water 340 meters north of the lead boat. The second harpoon tracked a different boat and connected. The explosion was visible on the formation's electro-optical sensors at 24 nautical miles. A brief white flash at the waterline followed by a secondary detonation that told the sensor operators the boat's fuel load had gone with it. 6 boats remaining. 11 minutes to firing position. At 4:58, the 6 remaining Ashura boats did something that the engagement planning models in Gravely's Combat Information Center had not weighted as the primary branch. They separated. Not randomly, with a precision that indicated the maneuver had been planned and rehearsed. The 6 boats split into 3 pairs, each pair taking a different bearing from the formation's center, spreading the engagement geometry across a 60-degree arc that forced Gravely's Aegis system to manage 3 simultaneous threat axes instead of one linear closure. The intercept solutions that had been clean 30 seconds earlier became complicated. The harpoon reload cycle on Gravely was not fast enough to engage all 3 pairs before the fastest of them reached firing range. Reeves saw the geometry the moment it developed. So did Voss, watching from her emission station. And what Voss saw that Reeves was still processing was a second data point that changed the picture entirely. At 4:58 and 41 seconds, her passive emissions display lit up with active radar emissions from all 6 remaining boats simultaneously. Not fire control radars, search radars. They were not locking onto the formation's ships. They were painting a picture of the formation's exact disposition, every asset, every position, every gap in the defensive envelope, and they were transmitting that picture somewhere. Not to each other. The transmissions were directional, aimed northeast away from the formation, toward a point in the ocean that no American sensor had looked at in the last 4 hours, because nothing had given anyone a reason to look there. Voss looked there now. What the EP-3's passive sensors found at 4:59 in the northeastern quadrant was not a surface contact. It was not a radar emission. It was not a radio transmission. It was the absence of something that should have been there. A fishing vessel that had been sitting stationary on the formation's long-range surface picture since 2200 the previous night, 47 nautical miles northeast of the formation's center, had stopped transmitting its AIS transponder signal at 4:31, the exact moment the encrypted trigger burst had originated from that bearing, the exact moment the coverage gap had opened in the formation's northern sector. A vessel that had been electronically present for 6 hours had gone electronically silent at the precise second the Ashura boats had received their window-open signal. Voss had the connection in 8 seconds. The fishing vessel was not a fishing vessel. It was a command and control node, and the radar picture the 6 remaining Ashura boats were painting of the formation's disposition was being transmitted directly to it in real time, so that whatever asset it was coordinating could build a targeting solution from 47 nautical miles away without ever activating its own sensors. She had the bearing. She had the distance. She did not yet know what was at that bearing and that distance, sitting dark and silent in the pre-dawn ocean, receiving a real-time radar picture of the USS Harry S. Truman's exact position. The answer came from below. At 5:01, the hull-mounted sonar on USS Cole registered a launch transient on bearing 047. Single contact. The acoustic signature was not a torpedo. The pressure wave profile and the subsequent noise signature of an igniting rocket motor were consistent with one specific system in the threat library that every sonar operator in the 5th Fleet had been briefed on 18 months earlier. The JASC-2, Iran's submarine-launched anti-ship cruise missile, a weapon that had been publicly tested once in a controlled exercise in the Gulf of Oman, and that American naval intelligence had assessed as operationally limited, difficult to deploy reliably, and unlikely to appear in a real engagement scenario without significantly more preparation time than any known Iranian submarine could execute. The assessment had been wrong on every count that mattered. The preparation time had been 14 months. The submarine had been in position since 2300, and the JASC-2, now climbing from the surface of the Arabian Sea on bearing 047, had a targeting solution built from 6 minutes of real-time radar data transmitted by 6 fast attack boats that had accepted being engaged, accepted losing one of their own, and accepted the entire harpoon response as the cost of keeping American attention fixed on the northern and northwestern sectors, while the real weapon came from the northeast. The missile broke the surface at 5:01 and 18 seconds and immediately dropped to sea-skimming altitude, 47 nautical miles, at Mach 0.8. Time to impact on the USS Truman was 6 minutes and 11 seconds. One missile, one shot. Built from 14 months of preparation and 6 minutes of targeting data, purchased with the lives of the crew of one Ashura boat and the attention of every sensor operator in the formation. Reeves had the launch report at 5:01 and 31 seconds. The SM-2 engagement solution was available in 4 seconds. USS Gravely had firing angle. USS Cole had firing angle. The intercept geometry was not complicated, and the JASC-2, while capable, was not a hypersonic weapon. It was fast and low and designed to defeat radar coverage at the waterline, but it was not maneuvering unpredictably, and it was not employing active jamming. Against a functioning carrier strike group with available interceptors and clean firing solutions, it was a manageable threat. The first SM-2 launched from USS Gravely at 5:02 and 11 seconds. It acquired the JASC-2 at 31 nautical miles and closed the intercept geometry in 44 seconds. The warhead detonated at 5:03 and 07 seconds, 29 nautical miles northeast of the formation, close enough that the debris field was still descending when the second SM-2, already airborne as insurance, was commanded to safe and self-destructed over open water. The JASC-2 never reached 20 nautical miles from the USS Truman's hull. At 5:04, the 6 remaining Ashura boats, their radar transmissions cut the moment the missile launched, turned northeast, and went to maximum speed away from the formation. They had done what they had been sent to do. The command and control vessel at 47 nautical miles went back to AIS transmission 40 seconds after the JASC-2 was destroyed, its transponder reactivating as if it had experienced a routine technical interruption. By 5:30, it was indistinguishable from every other fishing vessel in the northern Arabian Sea. By 0600, Iranian state media had not reported anything. By 0700, the formation had resumed normal operations. By 0800, with 11 hours remaining on the president's 72-hour clock, the engagement log had been transmitted to 5th Fleet and the National Military Command Center, and every word of it was sitting on desks in Washington that would spend the next 3 days deciding what to do with it. The USS Harry S. Truman never changed course. Flight operations had never stopped. The one missile that Iran had spent 14 months positioning, planning, and executing an intricate 4-part operation to deliver had been destroyed 29 nautical miles from its target by a defensive system that had been designed, built, and deployed for exactly this moment. The 6 fast attack boats that had drawn American attention north and west, while the real weapon came from the northeast, were already back inside Iranian territorial waters before the sun came up. The submarine that had fired the JASC-2 was running silent and deep on a return course to Bandar Abbas. The fishing vessel that had never been a fishing vessel was transmitting its position to maritime traffic systems, as if the previous 2 hours had not happened. Iran had spent 14 months building a 4-layer operation designed to deliver one missile to within lethal range of an American carrier. The operation had worked on every level it was designed to work on. The diversion had diverted. The targeting data had been collected and transmitted. The submarine had fired from an undetected position. The missile had flown the profile it was designed to fly, and it had been destroyed 29 nautical miles from the hull it was built to sink. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Harry S. Truman, Reeves wrote his engagement log entry at 0530. Threat defeated. No damage. No casualties. One enemy surface asset destroyed. Then he looked at the timeline on his display. The encrypted trigger burst at 4:31. Voss on the circuit at 4:32. Modified alert at 4:33. And he added one line that his commanding officer kept in the final report, without a single word changed. Iran spent 14 months building a trap that worked perfectly. It failed because someone was listening, 16 minutes before it was supposed to begin. 19 hours and 13 minutes remained on the president's ultimatum. The Arabian Sea was flat and gray and completely silent, and the USS Harry S. Truman was already turning into the wind for the morning's first launch cycle, its flight deck alive with the organized noise of aircraft and crew and the specific mechanical momentum of a carrier that had not stopped flying and did not intend to.